everybody, Decking here, and welcome to the most epic month of the entire year, spooky, awesome Halloween time. I'm excited. Are you excited? I don't care, because I'm excited. I have enough excitement for, I think, at least 1/4 of the human population. So anyway, yeah, it's really gonna be a good month. I have a bunch of videos planned. I have a contest planned. I have Halloween that's coming up at the end of the month. Halloween is probably going to be a little shorter than last year was. Last year it was 13 days. I'm thinking about maybe only making it a week this year because I have some other projects. But, you know, I thought it would be a good idea. I thought it would be very pertinent. Is that the word I'm looking for? I don't know. Let's just roll with it. I thought it would be pertinent to start off the month with one of the spookiest devil fruits in all of One Piece. That is right. Today's video is, if you could not tell from the brickbats, and if you can locate all of the unique brickbats in my room, I will actually send you a, a slightly used bottle of Fiji water. So comment that below. But no, today's video is of course going to be on Gekko Moria's Kage-Kage no Mi, or the Shadow Fruit. Oh my god, guys, it's a shadow! It's attacking my face! Help! Okay, so, how exactly do you translate a shadow power into One Piece? Is this gonna be like in, like Naruto with, like, Shikamaru's shadow possession, or do you have the ability to just change the shape of your shadow? I mean, yes, technically you do. Not Shikamaru's shadow possession, but if you ate the Kage-Kage no Mi, yeah, you could change the shape of your shadow and make you do a bunch of funny poses if you want, although that's not nearly the strongest application of this fruit. So, this fruit is so strong. It is, I'm going to say it's one of the strongest fruits in One Piece. It just comes down to who uses it, right? And the thing is, Moria was a lazy bastard, okay? His whole thing was like, I'm just going to lay around and let other people do the work for me. Even with that attitude, he was able to get this far pretty much based off of just his fruit's abilities alone. Because it's one of those fruits that doesn't just give you one thing. Like, its purview is shadow, but all of the different things you could do with that, you could raise the dead, you could rip out other people's shadows and make them go unconscious, you could summon your own shadow, you could break apart your own shadow into a bunch of different forms to attack your opponent. So it's one of those things like Law's Op no Mi. It's like, yeah, it has a theme, like Law's fruit's theme is surgery, but all of the different things you could do with that, kind of the same thing with the Kage-Kage no Mi. But yeah, my point is, Moria was super slothful, but was able to get as far as he did. Pretty much just based on the merit of his fruit alone. So imagine if someone that had more initiative, that was more intelligent, that wanted it more, had the ability of the Kage-Kage no Mi. They would have gotten way further than that. But, yeah, let's just start slow, okay? What can you do with the Kage-Kage no Mi? Alright, well, let's start with your own shadow. I'm like, obviously you have the ability to manipulate your own shadow, but not just, like, making it do a bunch of funny things like, hey, check it out, I'm riding a horse. Not really, but I can make my shadow look like I'm riding a horse. No, you can summon your shadow as a three-dimensional being into our world, you know, so you can, like, it literally rises out of the ground like a clone, a sort of shadow clone, as it were. Anyway, this clone is made out of some sort of, like, black, viscous substance. You can literally break it apart into a variety of different things. So Moria's default Shadow Man, he called his Doppelman, as a reference to Doppelganger. So it takes, you know, this form. It kind of looks similar to him, same basic mouth and eyes. It just takes the form of, like, a shadow. Although, he can actually switch places with Doppelman, and it can take on an exact, like, he literally is cloning himself. He can take on the exact appearance of himself as well. Now, you can attack this Doppelman, you know, you can punch it, you can cut it, you could try to blow it up, you could do whatever you want with it, but it's not exactly made out of, like, solid matter. It is, like, it can attack you and it can hurt you, but if you destroy it, all that'll do is just kind of, like, you know, destroy it into, like, this weird goopy substance, and then it can just reform back into what it was. So, it's solid, but not really. Or think of it like a substance that is completely under the manipulation and control of the fruit's user. So Moria, he's just chilling out, like, laying down. Luffy comes in, and he's like, I'm gonna kick your ass! And Moria's like, okay, here. And then he just summons Doppelman to block Luffy. and Luffy's punching him, he's attacking it, and the Doppelman is being destroyed, but it's just getting broken up into little tiny bats that Moria refers to as brick bats, and he can make a variety of these things, and they don't suck blood, but they have fangs, they can bite your opponent. I mean, just think about that alone. I mean, that seems like a pretty cool ability, you know, you can make an army of bats to attack your opponent, but this is the kind of thing that's like, if Moria had more intelligence, more initiative, think of all the crazy crap you can make with that. If you could literally take this shadow goo substance, and you can shape it into any form that you want, make a variety of different weapons, make slashing weapons, blunt weapons, piercing weapons, have these bats have like drills coming out of their body or covered in spikes or like a whip or something. Like you can make all these weapons attacking your opponent at the same time. That's just the first thought I came up with. But yeah, Moria just created these little tiny bats that have little fangs, and they were biting Luffy all over, and they were, you know, mildly annoying but didn't really do any serious damage, you know? So that's just something I thought, you know, Moria could have came up with better. Same thing with Doppelman. Doppelman is just a clone of Moria, but he can shape the shadow pretty much however he wants. So give your Doppelman a giant spiked club arm or a shield arm or something cool, you know? Like, you could do that if you wanted to. The shadows can also fly, because they don't really seem to be adherent to, like, gravity and shit, you know? And you can make the wings for the brick bats, so just make a wing for your Doppelman and let him fly around, whatever. Anyway, that's just doing the stuff with your own shadow, though. And there is one more ability Moria did with this. He actually had a bunch of brick bats attack Luffy at once, and they were, like, congealing around him, and they made a black cube called his black box that they imprisoned Luffy in, and then Moria, when he was in Shadow's Asgard, just proceeded to beat the crap out of the box. So, I mean, that was probably, like, one of the most clever things he did. Like, I can actually make a prison out of my shadow to imprison my opponent, but beyond that, didn't really do a lot of other clever things with his own shadow, except that one time he, you know, made it look like himself, so it was like, ooh, it was a fake out. But yeah, that's the situation there, but that's just with your own shadow. Now, the ability of the Kage-Kage no Mi also involves manipulating other shadows, but you have to take it out of them first. So Moria cannot just, like, you know, walk into a crowded room, shine a spotlight on a bunch of people, and we're like, shadows, rise from your owners and come to me. He first has to sever them, and he usually does this with just a pair of scissors. And this is actually a callback to some old school cartoons, like back in the black and white silent era of cartoons. Some of those cartoons were messed up, guys. They dealt with some really freaky shit. So there was one I think where Pluto and Goofy get kidnapped by a mad scientist, and this mad scientist uses a pair of scissors and, like, rips Pluto's shadow out of him, and it's this really freaky scene, right? Yeah, so anyway, I think that's where Oda was getting the inspiration from it, like physically using a pair of just scissors to cut off the shadow. Because Oda, I mean, he's a mangaka, he's a cartoonist in a sense, so maybe he took inspiration from those old cartoons from, like, the silent era. So what Moria does, he has a giant pair of scissors. Moria himself is a really big kind of onion human. He's pretty tall, so he can actually use these giant scissors to fight, too. They're, like, magnetically clipped, so he can, like, disassemble them and use them as swords, but once again, he doesn't fight very often. Although when he ever, you know, during Marineford, when he did use his scissors, he seemed rather proficient at them. He seemed like he could twirl them around and use them as actual weapons and stuff. But what he usually does is he'll grab his opponents, and remember, there needs to be a shadow present, so he has to have a spotlight or the moon, or there has to be some way that light can shine on your opponent to get the shadow to appear. Because if the shadow doesn't exist, if it's pitch dark, this won't work. So he shines a spotlight on somebody, picks them up, and then just uses his scissors to just literally cut off the shadow, and it separates from the body. Now, the person in question does not die. They just lose consciousness for a little while. However long they lose consciousness is completely dependent on their willpower. I think the standard is a few days you're going to be unconscious, but eventually you will regain your senses, and for the most part, everything is okay. Losing your shadow doesn't mean you get weaker. It doesn't mean you're drugged or something, or you're poisoned. It's like slowly draining your life force. Nothing like that. You can live a perfectly normal existence without your shadow. Oh, except for the fact that you can never let natural light touch your flesh again, or you'll be singed into oblivion. That is kind of a downside. So, anytime the light of the sun hits you, when you do not have a shadow, whatever portion of the body the light hits, it just gets lit up, just ignited, and you're just gonna slowly disintegrate, is the best way I can describe it. Now, this doesn't apply for artificial lights, so as long as it's a flashlight, or a lamp, or a lantern, or a candle, or fire, that's fine. You could still be in the presence of that kind of light. But whenever the sun comes out, you have to make sure to stay inside or stay away from the sun or something, because if you're not, then you're just gonna be disintegrated. Now, as for the shadow itself, the shadow in this context is basically your essence. All right, now the way that Oda took this, and this is the reason I have all this Egyptian crap back here, you might be wondering. So I'm pretty sure Oda took the inspiration for what the shadow represents, or what abilities it has, from Egyptian mythology. Okay, because the ancient Egyptians had 5 different fragments of your soul, like the anatomy of who you were, of your soul, was broken up into 5 pieces, all right? And I have them written down here. The first one is your Ren, not talking about Hunter x Hunter here, but your Ren, which is your name. So just your name itself had power in the context of ancient Egypt. All right, so because he's like, this is your name, and as long as people would speak your name, you will never truly die. You will always live on as long as your name is spoken. For someone like a king, like Pharaoh, like King Tutankhamun here, we still know about this guy. We still speak his name all the time. We know who he is. We know how old he was when he died. He's a very famous Pharaoh. At least now he is, but maybe he wasn't always like that. But right now, in present day, he is. Probably the single most famous Egyptian pharaoh, next to Atem, of course. So in a sense, in the ancient Egyptians, he still lives on because we all know his name. So yeah, and that's also, we're going to make a few Yu-Gi-Oh references here because ancient Egypt, but also that's why there was such a big importance for Atem's name during Yu-Gi-Oh! You know, like, I need to find my name. That's the reason why it was such a big fragment of the soul for you to forget your name, or for others to forget your name. That's a big deal. So the next part is the Ib, or the heart, and the Egyptians believed the heart was the seat of the soul, kind of like the cornerstone of all of this. It held everything together, and it was the source, the wellspring of your emotions. Then you have the Ba and the Ka. Also, if you're a fan of Yu-Gi-Oh! From the Millennium World arc, you'll definitely reference this. The Ba is your personality, everything about you that makes you unique from other people. And the Ka is your vital fire, or your vital spark. Okay, it is essentially, this isn't a real candle, it's essentially the difference between life or death, because the ancient Egyptians and a lot of other cultures, you know, how do you distinguish a living body from a dead body? What is the difference? Well, a living body is warm, because we're warm-blooded. A dead body is cold. So they literally felt like there must be some sort of spark or flame, not like physically, not like you rip yourself open, you see I see a little candle in there, but like, you know, metaphorically, there's a spark in there that keeps that warmth, because they didn't understand the whole concept of, like, you know, body heat, and, you know, like your blood and your heart pumping, and like what actually generates your body heat and stuff. So there's like, that's the difference there. But the 5th part of the soul is your, and this is the one that's the hardest to pronounce, of course, the one that's integral for this video, the Shuit, the Shuit. I'm sorry, I like ancient Egyptian mythology, not really that great at pronouncing it, therefore, but it is your shadow, or your essence. Okay, so that is basically the same way it's viewed here, because later on during One Piece we get introduced to the soul fruit wielded by Big Mom, right? So the soul and the shadow, 2 different things, okay? And the shadow basically retains all of the things in life that you were really good at. So if you were a really good swordsman and you get your shadow ripped out, that shadow retains all of your ability as a swordsman. Now, you still have that ability too. All right, if you're still like Zoro, when he got his shadow removed and it got thrown into a general zombie, the general zombie was really good at swordsmanship and used Santoryu, but Zoro didn't get weaker. It's not like all of his mojo got sucked out. He's still a swordsman too. It's just that it kind of retains a memory of that. Also, it retains your memories, it would seem, as well, because Ryuma was still able to remember that he was in fact a samurai of Wano. Now, the other zombies, like the penguin zombie that Sanji was in, and then the general zombie that Zoro's shadow was in, they didn't really seem to remember too much about their past, so it might have been like Ryuma like maybe read a book about himself, or someone told him about who he was, or maybe it was just those zombies were relatively new, so it maybe takes a while for those memories to surface. But Ryuma could definitely remember who he was. All right, so, or maybe it's just because Ryuma, as a samurai, he had so much, like, pride and dignity, it just retained into his shadow. So maybe they weren't exactly memories, like he could remember everything about his past, but it was such a big, important part of him that stayed with him. Kind of the same thing with, like, the general zombie with Zoro's shadow had, like, he kept saying, like, scars on a back of swordsman fames. You know, so he could still remember all that kind of stuff. But eventually, like, Sanji's zombie, you know, at first would not kick a woman, but eventually did. So, the way that Moria can take use of other people's shadows, there's a few ways. The first way is he could actually just incorporate that shadow into himself. Let's say Moria has a big chess game coming up this Friday night, and oh man, I don't know how to play chess. That's okay, I will just find a master chess player, cut off their shadow, absorb it, and then boom, I'm a master chess player now. That's how one way you could do it. Or another way is you could take that shadow and you could throw it into a marionette. That's the cute way of saying a human corpse. Not necessarily a human corpse, also. It could be an animal corpse, too. Any sort of type of corpse, you know? Okay. So, the deal here is that shadows can make dead bodies animate. They can make them alive again, all right? So this is actually the difference between the soul fruit and the shadow fruit, okay? Because with the soul fruit, Big Mom can throw her souls into animals or inanimate objects, and she can make homies, but she cannot throw them into she cannot throw them into dead bodies and animate those, because that's only under the purview of the shadow fruit. Likewise, Moria can only throw, I think he can only throw shadows. Actually, you know what? He probably could throw shadows into living people, because shadows and souls are not the same thing. So Moria can incorporate the shadows into himself. Luffy absorbed 100 shadows on his own, without Moria's assistance whatsoever, and he was able to turn into Nightmare Luffy. So I guess if Moria really wanted to, he could take a bunch of shadows and throw them into another living person. But yeah. So, you know, this is where Dr. Hogback comes in. Dr. Hogback was this genius mad scientist, pretty much, that, you know, would grave rob and take all these corpses, and he could modify them, or if they're missing an arm, he'll stitch an arm back on or whatever, make them at least presentable, and then throw a shadow in it, and the shadow will once again retain, like if it's a swordsman shadow, the zombie will be, you know, a swordsman-based kind of zombie. But yeah, he's done a bunch of, like, nightmare experiments all throughout Thriller Bark. I mean, look at these things. Look at this messed up zebra unicorn and this freaking tree. Like, seriously, Dr. Hogback is like, Foss! I'm going to take a human face and graft it to an oak tree! Give me a shadow, Moria! Even Moria at that point would be like, you got problems, dude. I mean, I'll give you the shadow, but Jesus. You know, like, really a lot of messed up nightmare experiments going on in Thriller Bark. Cerberus is another one. But of course, his crowning achievement here is Victoria Sindri, who is this famous, rather busty, entertainer, and she died, and Hogback was obsessed with her, so he did the rational thing and stitch her corpse, but, you know, grave robber at first, grave robber body, stitch her corpse back up, and then animate her with a shadow that really hates plates, and then use that as your personal assistant. Yeah. So, Moria has complete 100% dominance over every shadow that he rips out, alright? Now, there's sort of a grace period here whenever he took out an exceptionally strong shadow like Luffy and he threw it into ores. For a little while, that shadow still retained Luffy's personality, so Ors was very disobedient. But after enough time passes, no matter what, no matter how strong the shadow is, it eventually becomes completely subservient to Moria, and all of the zombies on Thriller Bark obey his orders completely loyally, never go against him, and even Luffy's shadow was subjugated to this in Ors. Eventually, Ors calmed down, and he was like, what am I doing? I need to get back to Master Moria and listen to what he has to say. So, that's the way that it works. Now, Moria can, in fact, give out orders to other people. Like, he could say, all the general zombies, you will obey Absalom as your commander. So he can get, that's something he does because he's very lazy. So he'll be like, you know, all of the soldier and surprise zombies will obey, all the soldier and general zombies, those ones will obey Absalom. All of the surprise zombies and wild zombies, you will obey Perona. And then I don't think Hogback had control over any particular squadron. I think Hogback just had Sindri. So Moria could be like, Sindri, you will listen to everything Hogback says. Now, there's an issue with this because what happened with Chopper. So Chopper was fighting Sindri, and he was like holding her down and is like, you know, having this tearful, like, you know, you are not just a puppet. You used to be a living human. You need to remember who you are. And so that eventually caused Sindri's body to freeze up. She couldn't move after that. So I feel like if it was Moria that was giving the order directly, it would work. But because it was Hogback who was only given the command, you know, secondhand, it doesn't work too well, okay? But that was a very emotional moment there. Also, I would see there was a problem with that, like, for the chain of command. Like, Moria could be like, Sindri, listen to Hogback's every order. And then Hogback could say, Sindri, listen to Absalom's every order. And then Absalom could say, listen to Perona's every order. Like, you'd think after a while, eventually it would get to be kind of like, you know, bogged down or weakened because of the chain of command over and over and over again. You know what I mean? Okay, I think you do. I think you do. There's also another ability he has called Shadow Revolution, where he can change the shape of the shadow, and because whatever shape the shadow is has to adhere to the body shape, if he decides to make ores into the shape of a ball, the shadow, then his physical body will also become the shape of a ball. This was very useful in his fight with Luffy because basically he was able to mimic Luffy's Gamu Gamu no Mi's power into ores. Right, that's what you can do with the Shadow Fruit in the context of reviving the dead, making an army. Now, there are some flaws with this. One of which being this. Moria, see, he doesn't exactly take complete control over his island. He doesn't have the initiative to do it, as we stated. So, a major weakness of the zombies is that all you need to do to purify them, to get the shadow removed from a zombie, is to throw a little salt in their mouth. And whenever that happens, whenever the salt is just thrown in a zombie, the shadow just pops out. But the shadow can actually be physically grabbed and held down by anybody. It doesn't matter. You don't have to have a special ability. You don't have to have hockey or anything. You can just literally grab the shadow and stuff it in a jar, and then you have a shadow now. And this is what the Thriller Bark Victims Association did. They captured as many shadows as they could from a variety of different zombies trying to get their own shadows back. They took 100 of those and threw them into Luffy, and Luffy became Nightmare Luffy. However, this power-up only works for 10 minutes because Luffy is still a living human. Maybe if Moria did it himself, maybe if Moria threw the shadows into a living human himself, maybe they would stay in for longer. But it's a major downside because that means the shadows can actually be used against Moria. Now, maybe if Moria had a little bit more awareness of what was going on, and he could see, like, hey, those freaking piss ants down there are stealing all my shadows. Shadows, come back to me at once. He could probably do that. He could be like, come back, but Moria doesn't care. He's sleeping like 14 hours a day. So the Thriller Bark Victims Association's out there collecting and purifying all these shadows. Moria is just like, 5 more minutes. So he doesn't even really care, all right? But nothing else, it ended up being a little bit of part of his downfall because they used those shadows to empower Luffy, turn into Nightmare Luffy, and he was able to beat the crap out of him and Oars at the same time. Didn't last very long, but that was totally Moria's fault. Yeah. Now, the size of the zombie depends on how much salt you have to use, so shooting just a little bit of salt into Oars wasn't enough to actually purify him. They would need like a giant bag of salt to make it work. The reason that it was given why salt purifies the zombies, I've actually heard two. One of the explanations I've heard is this is actually part of Japanese lore, is that, not just Japanese, I think this is prevalent in other countries as well, but using salt to purify the dead or something like to that nature, that's one reason I've heard why salt works. And then another reason I've heard is that salt contains minute qualities of the sea. because that's how you get salt, especially probably in the One Piece world. They just take seawater and then boil it, and then you get salt. Easy. It's like a first-grade science experiment. So, because there's trace elements of the essence of the sea in there, because they're brought to life via devil fruit abilities, throwing a little bit of salt into the zombies, that's what makes them leave. I have a problem with that explanation, though, and my problem is this. Because they were beings that were animated using a devil fruit, and if the salt has the sea essence in there, and that's what purifies them, couldn't you use salt to, deactivate a homie? Couldn't you use salt to deactivate the toys on Dressrosa? The toys were created via Sugar's Hobby no Mi. Couldn't you go up to Kyros when he was the tin soldier and just throw some salt into his mouth and he would pop back into Kyros? I mean, it was never attempted. I gotta give you that much. They never tried it, but I'm just saying, like, okay, if that's the explanation you're doing, then wouldn't you be able to weaken a devil fruit user by, like, throwing salt into their mouth? Or, you see, that's the issue here. So I'm gonna say it has less to do with the connection with the sea, and it has more to do with that, mythology of you use salt to purify the wicked or something. You throw salt on an evil ghost or something and it gets disintegrated or something. That's what I'm going with here. You ever watch Mob Psycho 100? That's also another, parody. It's like Reagan Salt Punch, I'm gonna think it's more about that and less about the connection to the sea. Now, later on, during Marineford, when Moria was using his shadow powers, Jinbei just took a bunch of seawater and doused the zombies, but I think that has less to do with the sea and more about with the salt purifying them. Okay, so let's downplay the connection to that and just upplay that connection, because if that was the case, then I guess salt is one of the natural enemies of devil fruit users. Now, as we've stated, Moria can take his shadows into himself, and because he is the owner of the fruit, he's not limited by a number of shadows he can put inside, or a time limit. He can take every single shadow on Thriller Bark, all 1,000 of them, which he did, and incorporated them into himself to make Shadow Asgard! Awesome name for a move. Now, the problem was, though, at the same time he did that, it was right after a fight with Luffy, and he got the crap beat out of him, so he was barely conscious when he decided to do it, and because he was kind of fading in and out, he really couldn't control the shadows too much. Now, I think that if the shadows are in other zombies and Moria gets knocked unconscious, I don't think all of the shadows immediately leave. If that's the case. But because Moria was kind of an idiot and didn't think that far ahead, I think he got beaten senseless, and he's like, I'll show you, I'll take every shadow on the island and I'll make my ultimate form and I'll crush you. Not realizing that he's putting all of the shadows in one place, and then when he got his ass knocked out by Luffy, then all of the shadows he vomited up all of the shadows, and because he's losing consciousness, he can't decide where they're going, so they just all immediately, by default, go back to the people they were originally from. Even if they were on the other side of the planet, all of the shadows just spread all throughout the world, all the shadows that got stolen. So Moria's downfall really was, at the end of the day, his own fault. Because he didn't have to do that, he didn't have to absorb all the shadows into himself. He could have used his ability to try to escape. After Ors got decimated, he could have just been like, crap, I'm getting out of here. He could have taken the shadows and maybe taken 100 of them or so, and he could have made like a wall. Or he could have tried to imprison everybody on, because he could have done that. He did the black box thing. What's stopping Moria from using, like, I command the shadows to make a black, like, dome around all of the Straw Hats and all of the Victims Association? I'm just going to trap them in there really quick so I can get the hell out of here. I'll get the hell out of Dodge. Now, Kuma was there as well, so Kuma maybe he would have helped him get away, maybe he wouldn't have, I don't know, because Moria was kind of a disgrace to the government at that point, but because right after this, he participates at Marineford, but right after that, the government tries to kill him. So, yeah. So he could have just done that, but he didn't think. He's not thinking. He's just like, I'm gonna crush him with everything I've got, and that led to his downfall. Now, at the moment, Moria is probably alive. He was almost killed by Doflamingo. Doflamingo tried to lay the coup de grace on him, but Absalom was there, turned him invisible, and got him out. Now, Doflamingo did state that the injuries I gave him are life-threatening. So even if he was able to disappear, then what are you going to do? In fact, Doflamingo just thought it was another aspect of the Kage-Kage no Mi, because it had so many things you could do with it then what's the point, right? But no, it was in fact Absalom. But since Absalom rescued him, he might have, and Hogback, because the last time we saw, Absalom and Hogback and Moria were leaving. So maybe Absalom brought him back to Hogback and he, fixed up Moria. So I'm sure Moria's not dead, but we don't know where he's at right now. We don't know what that group is doing. We know what Perona's doing. We know what Absalom's doing, but we don't know about Hogback and Moria. Now, the reason why that the government would probably want the powers of the Kage-Kage no Mi is because, hey, guess what? You can reanimate the dead. So you could take, if you have the corpse of like Joy Boy or somebody from the Void Century, you could reanimate them and have them fight on your side. They could have used that to take out, like think of all the strongest pirates that are dead. If you could just go around and grave rob, the government could find out where Whitebeard's corpse is, send an entire fleet there, take his corpse, use the Kage-Kage no Mi, reanimate him with a pretty strong shadow, and boom, you have Whitebeard working for you now. So yeah, that would be a really cool ability, and I think that's maybe the reason, like, they maybe let Moria do what he wanted to for a while, but then after everything that's going on in the world with Blackbeard, times are changing, maybe after Marineford, they finally decided, okay, we can't let, this is an incredibly OP fruit. For one thing, we can't let an idiot like Moria have it anymore. Number two, we can't let it risk falling into the hands of a pirate or, a god help us, a Yonko or Blackbeard. So three, we're gonna kill Moria and get his fruit, and we're gonna use it the way we need to use it. So that's probably, I would say, the reason why they sent Doflamingo out to finish him off, to get the powers of the Kage-Kage no Mi. But it didn't work out that way. Even so, it's still one of the most powerful fruits in the world. Even used by a layabout like Moria, he was able to make this this operation, Thriller Bark, the entire island, 10 years on the Grand Line, capturing all these people. I mean, like, look, if Moria just had a little bit more drive, he could have had a loyal army, an entire crew of zombies. He could have set sail in the world. He could have done some mass damage if he could have become Yonko status if he just had a little bit more drive and used his ability in a little, more clever ways. I don't see any reason why someone that has those traits got their hands on the Kage-Kage no Mi. If they used it correctly, they could even become a Yonko. But Moria just didn't want it enough, I guess, or he couldn't find himself in him to do it. Whatever. Anyway, thanks for watching, everybody. Hope you enjoyed this video. Leave your comments below about the Kage-Kage no Mi and all the cool things you can do with it. Get ready for a month of, dare I say, spooktacular entertainment? Alright, I'll go now. Later, guys.